The maintenance bay of Nexus Prime reeked of engine oil and ozone, a familiar cocktail that Dante Vos had grown to appreciate over his 26 years of existence. Sparks cascaded from his plasma torch as he welded a cracked thruster housing, the brilliant white light reflecting off his sweat-dampened forehead. His calloused hands moved with practiced precision, each motion born from necessity rather than passion. "Another day, another broken ship," he muttered, setting down his tools to examine the repair. The owner of this particular vessel, a Corvan trader with more credits than sense, had managed to crack the housing by pushing his engines beyond safe parameters. It would take Dante 3 hours to fix what 5 minutes of caution could have prevented. Through the grimy viewport of his workshop, the sprawling metropolis of the trade station stretched endlessly in all directions. Nexus Prime floated in the neutral zone between the Human Federation and the Veilthran Empire, serving as a melting pot for dozens of species seeking commerce, adventure, or simply a place to disappear. For Dante, it was home by default rather than choice, a place where a human with no family name could scrape together enough credits to survive. His wrist communicator chimed with an incoming message. Dante glanced at the holographic display and grimaced. Another overdue payment notice from the station authority. The rent on his workshop space had increased again, the 3rd time this year. At this rate, he'd be living in his ship's cargo hold within the month. "Need to find bigger clients," he said to the empty workshop, wiping his hands on an already stained rag. The problem was that bigger clients preferred established repair facilities with proper certifications and insurance. Dante's operation was strictly cash and carry, no questions asked. A soft chime indicated someone had entered his workshop. Dante looked up, expecting another desperate spacer with a dying engine and empty pockets. Instead, he found himself face to face with one of the most striking beings he'd ever seen. She was Veilthran, that much was immediately obvious. Her skin held the distinctive crimson hue of her species, though it seemed to shimmer with an inner light that spoke of noble blood. Silver hair cascaded down her shoulders like liquid mercury, framing features that belonged in classical sculpture rather than a dingy repair bay. Her eyes, the color of polished platinum, surveyed his workshop with barely concealed disdain. She wore robes of deep midnight blue, cut in the formal style favored by Veilthran aristocracy. Gold thread traced intricate patterns along the fabric's edges, and a jeweled pendant at her throat caught the workshop's harsh lighting. Everything about her screamed wealth, power, and privilege, exactly the kind of person who would never voluntarily set foot in Dante's humble establishment. "You are the human who repairs ships." Her voice carried the musical quality common to her species, though it was edged with unmistakable condescension. Dante straightened to his full height, suddenly conscious of the oil stains on his work clothes and the stubble covering his jaw. "Dante Vos, ship mechanic and engineer. What can I do for you?" Her platinum eyes narrowed slightly, as if his mere existence offended her. "My transport requires minor adjustments to its atmospheric processors. I was told you possess adequate skills for such mundane work." The emphasis on mundane wasn't lost on him. Dante felt his jaw tighten but forced a professional smile. Credits were credits, regardless of the source. "I'll need to examine the ship first." "Where is it docked?" "Bay 7, Tier 5, she replied curtly. "The work must be completed within 2 hours. I have pressing engagements that cannot be delayed." Dante grabbed his portable toolkit and followed her through the workshop's rear exit. The Veilthran moved with fluid grace, her robes barely whispering against the deck plating. He found himself studying the way she carried herself, every gesture precise and controlled, as if she'd been trained from birth to command attention and respect. Bay 7 housed a vessel that took Dante's breath away. The ship was a work of art masquerading as transportation, its hull crafted from polished crimson metal that seemed to pulse with its own inner fire. Flowing lines and elegant curves spoke of Veilthran aesthetic sensibilities, while the advanced thruster configuration promised speed that would leave most Federation vessels struggling to keep pace. "Beautiful ship," Dante commented, running his hand along the hull's surface. The metal felt warm to the touch, almost alive. "It belonged to my grandmother," the Veilthran woman said, her tone softening slightly. The Crimson Dawn has been in my family for 3 generations. There was genuine affection in her voice now, the first crack in her aristocratic facade. Dante found himself curious about this mysterious woman who could go from ice-cold superiority to nostalgic warmth in a heartbeat. The atmospheric processors were located in the ship's lower section, accessible through maintenance panels that had clearly been designed with Veilthran physiology in mind. Dante had to contort himself into uncomfortable positions to reach the primary regulators, his human frame not quite suited for the elegant curves of alien engineering. The mixture ratio is off by 0.3%, he diagnosed after running a diagnostic scan. Not dangerous, but it'll cause slight oxygen enrichment in the cabin atmosphere. Some species find it stimulating. The Veilthran's cheeks darkened to a deeper shade of crimson, the equivalent of a human blush. Fix it, she ordered sharply, her cold demeanor snapping back into place. Dante worked in silence, making the necessary adjustments with practiced efficiency. The job was routine, the kind of simple calibration any qualified technician could handle. He found himself wondering why someone of her obvious status would seek out a back-alley mechanic for such basic work. As he closed the final access panel, his elbow caught against something protruding from the Veilthran's robes. She stumbled slightly, and a small object tumbled from a hidden pocket, clattering across the deck plating. "Sorry," Dante said, immediately dropping to retrieve the fallen item. "Didn't mean to." His words died as his fingers closed around the object. It was roughly the size of his palm, crafted from what appeared to be crystallized starlight. Complex geometric patterns covered its surface, shifting and flowing like living things. The moment his skin made contact, the artifact began to glow with soft golden radiance. The Veilthran woman gasped, her platinum eyes going wide with shock and something that might have been fear. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You're human. It shouldn't respond to human touch." Dante stared at the glowing artifact in his palm, feeling an odd tingling sensation spreading up his arm. The geometric pattern seemed familiar somehow, as if he'd seen them in half-remembered dreams. "What is this thing?" "The soulfire pendant," she breathed, reaching out to take it back. Her fingers brushed against his as she grasped the artifact, and the golden glow intensified for a moment before fading as she pulled away. "It's been in my family for 1,000 years. Only those of true noble blood can activate its power." She studied him with new intensity, her disdain replaced by calculating curiosity. "What is your lineage, human? Who were your parents?" Dante shrugged, trying to ignore the way her touch had sent electricity racing through his veins. "Nobody important. I grew up in the station's orphan quarters. Never knew my parents." "That cannot be," she said firmly. "The pendant does not lie. There is noble blood in your veins, however diluted it may be." "Look, lady," Dante began, but she cut him off with an imperious gesture. "I am Seraphina Keth, daughter of House Keth, heir to the crimson throne of Veilthra," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "And you, human, are far more than you appear to be." Before Dante could respond, she was already walking away, her robes billowing dramatically behind her. At the bay's entrance, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "This changes nothing," she said coldly. "Whatever blood flows in your veins, you are still beneath my station. But perhaps you are not entirely worthless after all." With that pronouncement, Seraphina Keth vanished into the station's crowded corridors, leaving Dante alone with 1,000 questions and the lingering scent of exotic perfume. He stared at his palm where the pendant had rested, the tingling sensation slowly fading. For the first time in his life, Dante began to wonder if there might be more to his heritage than a childhood spent scraping by in the station's lowest levels. The encounter had lasted less than an hour, but something fundamental had shifted. The aristocratic Veilthran had scorned his bloodline, called him beneath her station, yet her family's ancient artifact had responded to his touch in ways that should have been impossible. As he packed up his tools and returned to his workshop, Dante couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered world was about to become far more complicated. The woman with crimson skin and silver eyes had looked at him like he was a puzzle to be solved, and something told him she wouldn't rest until she found all the pieces. The question was, did he want to be found? 3 days had passed since Serafina Keth had swept out of his workshop, leaving Dante with more questions than answers. The memory of the glowing pendant haunted his thoughts, interrupting his work and disturbing his sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see those shifting geometric patterns and feel the strange tingling that had coursed through his body at the artifact's touch. Dante set down his plasma cutter and rubbed his tired eyes. The Corvin trader's ship sat half-repaired in his bay, but his heart wasn't in the work. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to find them. The academic quarter of Nexus Prime occupied the station's upper levels, where the air was cleaner and the lighting softer than the harsh industrial sectors below. Here, scholars and researchers from dozens of worlds gathered to study, debate, and preserve the galaxy's accumulated knowledge. It was also where Tobias Ashworth maintained his cluttered office and private library. Dante had met the elderly human academic 5 years ago when Tobias needed repairs on his personal shuttle. The man was an eccentric collector of historical artifacts and ancient texts, specializing in pre-contact civilizations. More importantly, he was one of the few people on the station who treated Dante as an equal rather than just another grease-stained mechanic. The door to Tobias's office was buried behind stacks of data tablets, rolled manuscripts, and artifacts from a dozen different worlds. Dante knocked twice and waited for the familiar gravelly voice to call out permission to enter. "Dante, my boy." Tobias looked up from an ancient tome written in flowing Veilthran script, his weathered face creasing into a smile. The man was in his 70s, with wild gray hair and clothes that looked like they'd been assembled from whatever was within arm's reach. "What brings you to my humble chaos?" "I need your expertise," Dante said, settling into the only chair not occupied by books or artifacts. "What do you know about Veilthran noble bloodlines?" Tobias's bushy eyebrows shot upward. "Specific question. Any particular reason you're interested in aristocratic alien genealogy?" Dante hesitated, then decided honesty was his best approach. He described his encounter with Serafina and the pendant's unexpected response to his touch. As he spoke, Tobias's expression grew increasingly grave. "Show me your hand," the scholar said when Dante finished his account. "What?" "Your palm, where you held the artifact." "Let me see it." Dante extended his hand, palm up. Tobias produced a small magnifying device and examined his skin with scientific intensity. After several minutes, the older man sat back with a heavy sigh. "I was afraid of this," he muttered, moving to a locked cabinet in the corner of his office. "Dante, what I'm about to tell you must never leave this room. Do you understand?" The serious tone in Tobias's voice sent a chill down Dante's spine. "I understand." The scholar unlocked the cabinet and withdrew a small wooden box, its surface carved with symbols that seemed oddly familiar. He placed it on his desk between them and opened it with reverent care. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a pendant nearly identical to the one Serafina had carried. The same crystalline material, the same geometric patterns, but this one remained dark and lifeless. "This belonged to my grandmother," Tobias said quietly. "She was part of a research expedition to the Outer Rim 70 years ago. They discovered ruins on a dead world called Calith Prime, ruins that predated both human and Veilthran space flight by millennia." Dante leaned forward, studying the dormant pendant. "What kind of ruins?" "A city," Tobias replied, his voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. "Magnificent and terrible, with architecture that blended human and Veilthran design elements in impossible ways. The expedition found evidence of a civilization that should never have existed, a hybrid culture that flourished when both our species were supposedly confined to their home worlds." The scholar activated a holographic display, showing images of towering spires and graceful bridges that seemed to dance between human functionality and Veilthran artistry. At the city's heart stood a massive temple complex, its walls covered in the same geometric patterns that adorned the pendants. "The expedition uncovered records," Tobias continued. Fragmentary, but enough to piece together the truth. Thousands of years ago, there was contact between our species. Not the first contact recorded in official histories, but something far older and more profound. Dante felt his mouth go dry. What kind of contact? A covenant, Tobias said. A formal alliance sealed through intermarriage between human and Veilthran noble houses. The hybrid offspring of these unions became the ruling class of a star-spanning empire that lasted for nearly 1,000 years. The implications hit Dante like a physical blow. That's impossible. Humans couldn't even reach orbit 1,000 years ago, let alone. Official history is written by the victors, Tobias interrupted. And sometimes, the victors have very good reasons for wanting certain truths to remain buried. The scholar touched a control, and the holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber. At its center stood an altar flanked by 7 crystal pedestals, each designed to hold an artifact like the pendants. The bonding chamber, Tobias explained. Where the original covenants were sealed. The pendants were created as symbols of the union, one for each of the founding bloodlines. They respond only to those who carry the genetic markers of both species. Dante stared at the image, his mind reeling. You're saying I'm descended from these hybrids? It's the only explanation for the pendant's response, Tobias said gently. Somehow, against all odds, the bloodline survived. It may be diluted after all these centuries, but it's still there in your genes. But how? Where did the hybrids go? What happened to their empire? Tobias's expression darkened. War. Betrayal. Fear. He manipulated the display again, showing images of burning cities and fleeing refugees. The pureblood factions of both species turned against their hybrid rulers. They saw the unions as corruption, dilution of their racial purity. The war that followed lasted decades and nearly destroyed both civilizations. The hybrids lost. They were scattered to the stellar winds, Tobias confirmed. Some fled to the far reaches of space, others went into hiding among the general population. Official records were purged, monuments destroyed, entire bloodlines erased from history. Within a generation, the hybrid empire became nothing more than legend. Dante felt overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. His entire life, he'd assumed he was nobody special, just another orphan trying to make his way in an indifferent universe. Now he was being told he carried the blood of ancient royalty. Why are you telling me this? He asked. If it's so dangerous. Because the pendants are awakening, Tobias said urgently. My grandmother's expedition found evidence of a prophecy, a prediction that the scattered bloodlines would eventually reunite and restore the covenant. The fact that Seraphina's pendant responded to you means the time may be at hand. Seraphina, Dante repeated, his thoughts turning to the proud Veilthran noblewoman. She must know about this. Tobias shook his head. Unlikely. The Veilthran nobility guard their ancient secrets jealously, but even they may not remember the full truth. To them, you're probably just an anomaly, something to be studied or eliminated. A chill ran down Dante's spine. Eliminated? There are those among both species who would kill to keep the old secrets buried, Tobias warned. If word spreads that a hybrid bloodline has surfaced. A soft chime from Dante's communicator interrupted the conversation. He glanced at the incoming message and felt his blood freeze. It was from Seraphina, brief and imperious as always, meet me at the Stellar Gardens. Level 7. Come alone. Tobias read the message over his shoulder and paled. Don't go, he said immediately. It could be a trap. But Dante was already standing, his mind made up. I need to know what she wants. Besides, if she meant me harm, would she warn me to come alone? The Veilthran have a twisted sense of honor, Tobias called as Dante headed for the door. They might consider a fair warning before murder to be proper etiquette. Despite his fears, Dante found himself smiling at the old scholar's concern. I'll be careful. And Tobias? Thank you. For everything. The stellar gardens were one of Nexus Prime's most beautiful spaces, a vast arboretum filled with plant life from across the galaxy. Artificial sunlight filtered through a transparent dome overhead, while gentle fountains provided a soothing backdrop of flowing water. It was also relatively private, with numerous alcoves and hidden paths where conversations could be held away from prying eyes. Dante found Serafina beside a fountain dedicated to interspecies cooperation, its waters dancing in patterns that shifted between human and alien artistic styles. She had traded her formal robes for more practical attire, a form-fitting bodysuit in deep violet that accentuated her natural grace while allowing for easier movement. Her silver hair was bound in an elegant braid, and the soulfire pendant hung openly at her throat. She turned as he approached, her platinum eyes studying him with the intensity of a predator evaluating potential prey. "You came. You asked," Dante replied, stopping just out of arm's reach. The space between them felt charged with electricity, tension mixed with something deeper and more dangerous. "I have been researching your anomaly," she said, circling him slowly. "The family archives contain references to humans who could activate Veilthran artifacts, but the records are incomplete. Deliberately obscured. Find anything interesting?" Serafina paused directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell her exotic perfume. "Stories. Legends of a time when our peoples were closer. But stories often contain more truth than official histories." She reached up and touched the pendant at her throat. It began to glow softly, casting golden light across her crimson features. "This belonged to my ancestor, Lady Velthera Keth. According to family tradition, she was bonded to a human prince in the old ways. Their union was said to be blessed by the stars themselves. What happened to them?" "They died," Serafina said simply. "Both of them, along with their children and anyone who supported their union. The purges were thorough." The casual way she spoke of such tragedy sent a chill through Dante. "And you think I'm descended from survivors?" "I think you are exactly what you appear to be," she replied, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "A mongrel whose bloodline was corrupted by forbidden mingling. The question is what to do about it." Her words stung, but Dante forced himself to remain calm. "You could always pretend this never happened. Walk away and forget about the mechanic who made your pendant glow." Serafina's laugh was like silver bells wrapped in ice. "Forget? You have activated a relic that has remained dormant for 300 years. You represent either the fulfillment of ancient prophecy or a threat to everything my family has built. Forgetting is not an option." She stepped closer, and Dante found himself caught between the desire to flee and the inexplicable urge to pull her into his arms. The contradiction was maddening. "There will be a formal gathering tomorrow night," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The noble houses are meeting to discuss trade agreements, but there will be opportunities for private conversations. You will attend as my guest." "I don't think that's a good idea," Dante protested. "Your people aren't exactly known for their tolerance of humans." "My people respect strength and despise weakness," Serafina corrected. "You will attend, and you will comport yourself with dignity. If you truly carry hybrid blood, it is time you learned to act like it." Before he could argue further, she pressed something into his hand, a small crystal card that would serve as his invitation to the gathering. Her fingers lingered against his palm for a moment longer than necessary, and the pendant's glow intensified. "Tomorrow night," she repeated, then turned and walked away without looking back. Dante stood alone beside the fountain, staring at the invitation card and wondering what he was getting himself into. The safe, simple life he'd built for himself was crumbling around him, replaced by something vast and dangerous and utterly beyond his control. But as he watched Serafina's elegant form disappear into the garden's shadowed paths, he realized he no longer wanted the safety of ignorance. Whatever consequences awaited him, he would face them standing tall, as befitted someone who might carry the blood of ancient kings. The grand atrium of Nexus Prime's diplomatic quarter had been transformed into a glittering showcase of Veilthran opulence. Crystalline chandeliers cast prismatic light across walls draped in flowing silks, while exotic flowers from the Veilthran homeworld filled the air with their intoxicating fragrance. The cream of alien nobility moved through the space like predators at a watering hole, beautiful, deadly, and utterly aware of their own superiority. Dante stood at the entrance, acutely conscious of how out of place he looked despite his borrowed formal wear. Tobias had procured the midnight blue suit from somewhere in his vast collection of acquired belongings, claiming it had once belonged to a human diplomat. The fabric felt foreign against his skin, too fine and restrictive after years of practical work clothes. "You can do this," he muttered under his breath, straightening his shoulders. "You're not just a mechanic anymore. You're descended from kings." The mantra felt hollow as he stepped into the crowd. Conversations died as he passed, replaced by whispers and calculating stares. A few Veilthran nobles actually recoiled as if his mere presence might contaminate them. He searched the room for Serafina, needing to see at least one familiar face in this sea of hostility. He found her near the central fountain, surrounded by a cluster of admirers who hung on her every word. She wore a gown that seemed to be cut from liquid starlight, silver fabric that moved like water and caught the light with every gesture. Her crimson skin glowed against the pale material, and the soulfire pendant at her throat pulsed with soft golden light. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up and their eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment, the noise and chaos around them seemed to fade, leaving only that electric connection that had sparked between them from their first meeting. Then one of her companions noticed her distraction and followed her gaze. "Serafina," drawled a voice like honey over steel, "surely you're not staring at that human mongrel." The speaker was tall even by Veilthran standards, with the deep crimson skin that marked him as high nobility. His features were sharp and aristocratic, with the kind of cold perfection that spoke of centuries of selective breeding. Diamond studs glittered in his elongated ears, and his formal robes were cut in the latest court fashion. "Varian," Serafina replied coolly, though Dante noticed the slight tension that entered her posture. "How delightfully predictable of you to notice." Varian Zeth, Dante realized. Serafina's betrothed, according to the information Tobias had managed to dig up. The man who would become her husband unless something dramatically changed the political landscape. "I notice many things," Varian continued, his pale eyes never leaving Dante. "Including the curious fact that a human mechanic has somehow gained entrance to a gathering of noble houses. One wonders what services he provides to earn such consideration." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. Several nobles tittered appreciatively at the verbal thrust. Serafina's eyes flashed dangerously. "Careful, Varian. Your jealousy is showing." "Jealousy?" Varian laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Of what possible interest could a grease-stained laborer be to me?" Before Serafina could respond, Dante had crossed the room and stood before the group. The conversations around them died as nobles pressed closer, sensing the potential for entertainment. "Dante Vos," he said, extending his hand to Varian in the human custom. "I believe we haven't been properly introduced." Varian stared at the offered hand as if it were a venomous snake. "I do not touch inferior species." "Pity," Dante replied, lowering his hand but maintaining his pleasant smile. "I was hoping to learn more about Veilthran culture." Serafina has been educational. The implication in his words was subtle but unmistakable. Around them, several nobles drew sharp breaths. To suggest intimacy with a betrothed woman was tantamount to declaring war in Veilthran society. Varian's face darkened to the color of dried blood. "You dare." "I dare to have conversations with interesting people," Dante interrupted. "Is that not permitted in your culture?" "I was under the impression that Veilthrans valued intellectual discourse." "We value many things," Varian snarled, his composure finally cracking. "Honor. Bloodline purity. The sanctity of noble bonds. All concepts that would be foreign to mongrel scum like you." The crowd pressed closer, forming a circle around the two men. Dante could feel the weight of their expectations, the hunger for violence that seemed to permeate Valethran high society. He glanced at Seraphina and saw her pale eyes wide with something that might have been fear or anticipation. Then perhaps, Dante said quietly, you'd like to educate me personally. The challenge hung in the air like a blade. In Valethran culture, such words could only lead to one conclusion. A duel, breathed one of the watching nobles. He's challenged Lord Varian to a formal duel. Varian's smile was predatory as he inclined his head in acceptance. So be it. As the challenged party, I claim the right to choose weapons and terms. Varian, no, Seraphina said, stepping forward. This is foolish. He's not trained in our ways. Precisely, Varian cut her off. Traditional blades, first blood or yield. The human will learn his place quickly enough. Within minutes, a dueling circle had been cleared in the center of the atrium. Servants appeared with ceremonial weapons, curved swords that gleamed like captured moonlight. Dante hefted one experimentally, trying to hide his inexperience with the alien weapon. The blade was perfectly balanced but felt strange in his hand, designed for Valethran physiology and fighting styles. Varian moved to the opposite side of the circle, his own blade singing as he drew it from its sheath. He moved through a series of practice forms, each movement precise and deadly. The watching nobles murmured appreciatively at his skill. Last chance to withdraw, Varian called across the circle. Acknowledge your inferiority and I might allow you to leave with your life. Dante raised his blade in salute, the gesture clumsy but determined. I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll stay. The duel began with explosive violence. Varian attacked immediately, his blade weaving patterns of death through the air. Dante barely managed to parry the first few strikes, driven back by the Valethran's superior skill and reach. The watching crowd cheered with each near miss, bloodlust evident in their voices. Steel rang against steel as Dante fought desperately to survive. Varian was everything he appeared to be, a master swordsman trained from childhood in the art of combat. His blade seemed to be everywhere at once, probing for weaknesses and finding them with surgical precision. A lucky cut opened a line of fire across Dante's left arm, drawing first blood. The crowd roared approval as he stumbled backward, his sleeve darkening with crimson. Yield, Varian commanded, pressing his advantage. You've lost. Accept defeat with whatever dignity your kind possesses. But as the Valethran moved in for the finishing blow, something strange happened. The soulfire pendant at Seraphina's throat began to pulse more rapidly, its golden light growing brighter. Dante felt an answering warmth in his chest, as if something dormant in his blood was finally awakening. Time seemed to slow. He could see Varian's attack coming, could read the intention in every line of the alien's body. Without conscious thought, Dante's blade moved to intercept, turning aside the killing thrust with an economy of motion that surprised them both. The counterattack came from instinct older than memory. Dante's sword flowed through a pattern that felt as natural as breathing, catching Varian completely off guard. The Valethran noble's eyes widened in shock as the human's blade slipped past his defenses, coming to rest against his throat with surgical precision. Yield, Dante said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent atrium. For a heartbeat, the tableau held. Then Varian's sword clattered to the floor as he raised his hands in surrender. I yield, he croaked, humiliation thick in his voice. The human has won. The crowd erupted in chaos. Voices rose in disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. Dante stepped back, lowering his blade as the implications of what had just happened began to sink in. He had not only defeated a Valethran noble in single combat, he had done so using techniques that he had never learned. Seraphina pushed through the crowd, her face pale with shock. She reached for the pendant at her throat, which continued to glow with golden fire. That's impossible, she whispered. Those were old forms. Ancient techniques that haven't been used in centuries. How could you? I don't know, Dante admitted, staring at the sword in his hands. It just felt right. Around them, the noble gathering was dissolving into heated arguments. Some demanded explanations, others called for Dante's immediate arrest. Through it all, Varian stood frozen in the center of the circle, his eyes fixed on Dante with something approaching terror. The bloodline, he breathed. It's true. The hybrid bloodline has returned. Before anyone could react to this pronouncement, Serafina grabbed Dante's arm. We need to leave. Now. They pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouts and questions that followed them. Serafina led him through a series of service corridors that eventually opened onto a private balcony overlooking the station's central void. Here, surrounded by stars and silence, they finally stopped running. You fought like one of the ancients, Serafina said, her voice filled with wonder and something that might have been fear. Those techniques, they were lost with the hybrid princes. No one has used them for 1,000 years. Dante set down his sword and flexed his wounded arm, wincing at the burn of the cut. I don't understand any of this. First the pendant, now this. What's happening to me? Serafina moved closer, her eyes reflecting the starlight beyond the balcony. You're becoming what you were always meant to be. The dormant genes are awakening, remembering skills and knowledge that were thought lost forever. She reached out tentatively, her fingers tracing the cut on his arm. Where she touched, the soulfire pendant's glow intensified, and Dante felt the wound begin to tingle and heal. This is forbidden, she whispered, but made no move to pull away. Everything about this, about you, goes against everything I was taught to believe. Then why are you here? Dante asked, covering her hand with his own. Why help me escape? Serafina looked up at him, her platinum eyes reflecting inner turmoil. Because for the first time in my life, I'm doing what I want instead of what I'm supposed to do. Because when I look at you, I see possibility instead of duty. Because. She trailed off, but Dante could see the truth in her eyes. The attraction between them had grown beyond mere curiosity or forbidden fascination. Despite every social barrier, every cultural taboo, they were falling in love. This will destroy everything, she said, her voice barely audible. My family, my position, the carefully maintained balance between our peoples. If we continue down this path. Then maybe it's time for something new, Dante interrupted, pulling her closer. Maybe the old ways need to be destroyed before something better can take their place. For a moment, they stood on the precipice of decision. Around them, the stars bore witness to the choice that would change the course of history. Then Serafina rose on her toes and kissed him, her lips warm and soft against his own. The pendant blazed with golden fire as their mouths met, and Dante felt something fundamental shift in the fabric of reality. This was more than just a kiss between two lovers, it was the first step toward fulfilling an ancient prophecy, the rekindling of a bond that had been broken for a millennium. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. The pendant's glow had settled into a steady pulse that matched the rhythm of their hearts. What happens now? Dante asked. Serafina smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it was completely genuine, no aristocratic mask, no calculated display of superiority. Just a woman in love, ready to face the consequences of her choice. Now, she said, we write our own destiny. Together. As if summoned by her words, a soft chime from her personal communicator broke the moment. She glanced at the message and her face went pale. What is it? Dante asked. My grandmother, Serafina replied, her voice tight with worry. Cassandra Keth, the family matriarch. She wants to see both of us. Immediately. Dante felt a chill of foreboding. That doesn't sound good. With Cassandra, you never know, Serafina said, taking his hand. She might want to kill us both for violating tradition. Or she might surprise us entirely. There's only one way to find out. Hand in hand, they stepped back into the station's corridors, ready to face whatever trials awaited them. Behind them, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal beings but perhaps, just perhaps, smiling at the renewal of an ancient bond between the stars. The forbidden love that had bloomed between a human mechanic and a Veilthran noble was about to face its greatest test. And in the shadows of the station, other forces were already moving to either protect or destroy the fragile hope that their union represented. The covenant of old was stirring to life once more, and the galaxy would never be the same.